What if I told you that everything you know about surviving in the rain is incomplete? For thousands of years, the indigenous peoples of North America lived in harmony with nature, which was not always kind. Torrential rains on the Great Plains or prolonged downpours in the forests of the Northeast were not just an inconvenience but a direct threat to life. They learned not just to endure the weather, but to meet it head-on using tricks that today seem almost magical. Their methods of protecting their clothing and fire did not require modern technology, but were based on a deep understanding of the materials that the earth provided them. From bison hides to the finest intestines, from tree bark to ordinary animal fat, everything was put to use. These secrets allowed them to stay dry and warm when the elements raged around them, ensuring the survival of their families and tribes. Watch the video to the end and you will learn 7 ancient Native American tricks that allowed them to stay dry in the heaviest downpour. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of the pre-industrial era. For many tribes, the basis of protection from rain was not fabric, but treated leather, and the main secret of its waterproofness was animal fat. This method was universal for both the tribes of the Great Plains and the peoples of the Eastern Woods. They discovered that fat rubbed into the pores of tan leather created a barrier that water could not penetrate. It was their version of modern water-repellent impregnation, completely organic and affordable. Not just any fat was suitable for this purpose, only those with a certain density and composition. The best were considered to be bison, moose, or deer fat, especially the internal fat, which was carefully collected during the cutting of the carcass. It was melted over a low heat, purified of impurities, and turned into a pure, thick oil known as tallow or pemmican fat. Sometimes even bear fat was used, which was valued for its special properties. This process required patience and expertise. Leather itself is not waterproof, especially if it is tanned using traditional smoking methods or with the use of brains. It becomes soft and pliable, but absorbs moisture. To turn it into a raincoat, additional processing was required. Craftsmen carefully rubbed the prepared fat into the surface of the leather, paying special attention to the seams and edges of the product. This process was repeated several times until the leather stopped absorbing the oil. The fat filled the microscopic pores in the skin's structure that had formed during tanning and stretching. It created a flexible but dense barrier. Raindrops falling on such a surface were not absorbed, but simply rolled off. This allowed a warrior or hunter to stand in the rain for hours without getting wet. Such clothing remained dry and retained heat. Of course, this method had its own peculiarities. The fat impregnation required regular renewal, as over time the fat could be washed out or worn away. Also, in very cold weather, such leather could become stiffer than usual. But these drawbacks were a small price to pay for the ability to stay dry and warm. Fat was not just food, it was an essential technological material. We would love to hear your opinion. What do you think of this simple and ingenious solution compared to our high-tech jackets? Write about it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to learn more about the wisdom of ancient peoples. Want to know the secret that literally changed the rules of survival on the Great Plains? For the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Comanche tribes, the best protection from the rain was not just leather, but a whole bison hide, preserved with fur. It was not just clothing, but a real mobile home that was carried on the shoulders. The weight of such a cloak could be considerable, but its protective properties were unmatched in the open steppes. The main secret lay in how exactly this cape was worn. In dry weather, it was often worn with the fur inside for warmth, but as soon as it started to rain, the cape was turned inside out. This may seem illogical, but that was the trick. The thick and dense bison fur had natural water-repellent properties. The hairs of the fur were covered with a natural grease, lanolin, which prevented water from being absorbed. When rain fell on the fur, the drops simply rolled off the hairs without reaching the skin. In addition, the thick wool created an air layer that prevented moisture from penetrating the skin itself. Water simply slid off the surface like a tiled roof. The inside of the skin was carefully tanned to a soft suede finish. This made the cape comfortable to wear. It did not rub and was pleasant to the touch. A person covered with such a cape remained in a dry and warm cocoon, even if a storm was raging outside. This was critically important during long journeys or when observing the enemy. The size of the cape also played a role. It was large enough to cover not only the rider, but also part of his horse. A warrior could sit in the saddle, completely wrapped in the skin, protecting himself and his equipment. When on foot, it served as a cloak that covered a person from head to toe. But what did peoples who did not have access to bison herds do? In the dense forests of the Northeast or the cold Subarctic, completely different solutions were needed. In the next chapter, you will learn about a material that seems completely unsuitable for clothing, but is one of the best waterproof materials in the world. What I'm about to show you seems almost unbelievable. The peoples of the Subarctic, such as the Cree and Athabascan, and their northern neighbors, did not have bison, and rain and wet snow were a constant problem. They found a solution in the most unexpected parts of animals. They learned to make lightweight and completely waterproof parkas and capes from the processed intestines and swim bladders of large animals and fish. This material, known as kamak, was the pinnacle of technological thought. Its manufacture required incredible labor and precision. The intestines of animals such as walruses or large seals, and in forest areas, moose or fish, were carefully cleaned of their internal contents and fat. They were then soaked and scraped for a long time until only a thin but very durable serous membrane remained. These membranes were then inflated and dried. After drying, they became similar to thin, translucent parchment. The resulting strips were sewn together to create a fabric for future clothing. The seams were a true work of art, as they also had to be waterproof. Instead of ordinary thread, the thinnest strips of tendon were used for sewing. When wet, the tendons swelled, thus tightly sealing the holes from the needle punctures. This created a seam that did not let a single drop of water through. Such clothing was not simply sewn, but literally assembled into a single airtight cocoon. The finished parka made of intestines was incredibly light. Unlike heavy bison hide, it weighed almost nothing and could be rolled up into a small ball. At the same time, it was 100% waterproof. A hunter wearing such clothing could sit in a boat for hours in the pouring rain and remain completely dry. This material was also surprisingly tear-resistant. Although it looked fragile, it was not easy to tear. It was flexible and did not restrict movement, which was critical during hunting. It was the ideal outerwear for wet and cold climates. This material was used to make more than just clothing. It was used to make waterproof bags for storing supplies, covers for weapons, and even translucent windows for dwellings that let in light but protected from wind and rain. It was a versatile, high-tech material for its time. This trick was unique and had no analogs in the southern plains. It was born out of necessity in conditions where wet clothes meant rapid death from hypothermia. It is a true marvel of ingenuity, based on a deep knowledge of anatomy and the properties of natural materials. If you are impressed by this technology, please like this video. Are you ready for the shocking truth about why the Tepee, the home of the nomads of the Great Plains, is one of the most perfect shelters from the rain? At first glance, it is just a cone made of poles and skins, but in fact it is an ingenious engineering structure. Its shape and construction have been refined over centuries to withstand not only hurricane-force winds, but also the heaviest downpours. The secret begins with the shape itself. A cone is an ideal aerodynamic shape that causes the wind to flow around it rather than press against its walls. But for rain, the angle of inclination is important. The walls of the Tipi were steep enough that water did not linger on them for a second. Raindrops rolled down instantly, with no chance of seeping inside. The Tipi cover was traditionally sewn from a dozen or more treated bison hides. These hides, as we already know, had water-repellent properties of their own. But the key point was the smoking technology used in their processing. The smoke impregnated the skin, making it not only soft but also much more resistant to moisture. Even when wet, smoked leather did not warp or shrink when it dried. In addition, the smoke made it breathable. This meant that moisture from people's breath and evaporation from the fire could escape, but rainwater could not penetrate inside. The inside of the teepee always maintained a dry and healthy microclimate. Special attention was paid to the seams. The skins were sewn together using strong tendons. When exposed to moisture, the tendons, as in the case of intestinal parks, swelled slightly. This swelling tightly sealed the holes from the seams, leaving no chance for rain to seep through. The entrance to the teepee was always located on the leeward side, usually to the east. It was closed with a special flap, a piece of leather that fit tightly against the opening. During heavy rain, this flap reliably protected the entrance from water and wind. At the top of the teepee was a smoke hole, which was critical for ventilation in the hearth. But how did it keep the rain out? For this, there was a special system of two ears or flaps. These were two triangular pieces of leather that were controlled by special poles from the outside. Thus, the teepee was not just a tent, but a high-tech shelter. Each of its elements was designed to combat the elements. But what happened if a drop did seep inside? In the next chapter, you will learn about the ingenious internal design that solved this problem. Even in the most perfect dwelling, such as the Tipi, a heavy and prolonged downpour could be a problem. Tiny drops could seep through the smoke hole or run down the poles. To combat this, the Plains tribes had another secret, a special inner lining that the Lakota called ozan. This element is often mistakenly considered to be simply insulation, but its main function during rain was precisely waterproofing. The ozan was a wide strip of tanned leather that was attached to the poles from the inside around the entire perimeter of the teepee. It ran from the ground and rose to a height of 1.5 to 2 meters, forming a second inner wall. The main magic of the ozan was how it dealt with leaks. Any drop of water that managed to seep through the outer covering fell not on the people, but on this inner lining. Since the ozan did not fit tightly against the outer wall, the water simply ran down it into the space between the two layers. At the bottom, this water did not fall on the living space, but on the ground at the very edge of the teepee. As we remember, a drainage ditch was often dug around the dwelling. Thus, the water collected by the ozan was safely removed from the living area and drained into the ground outside the teepee. It was a simple and ingenious system of internal water collection. In addition to protecting against leaks, the ozan performed other important functions. It created an upward airflow that improved the draft for the fire. Cold air from the street, entering under the lower edge of the tire, hit the ozan and rushed upward toward the smoke hole, carrying the smoke with it. This kept the air in the teepee clean. In cold weather, this same air layer between the ozan and the tire served as an excellent insulator. It kept the heat from the fire inside the living space, preventing it from escaping through the walls. This made life in the Tipi comfortable even in severe frosts, not to mention rainy weather. The ozan also protected against condensation. In cold weather, moisture from people's breath could settle on the inside of the cold tarp. The ozan, being warmer, prevented this condensation from forming in the living area and dripping on people and belongings. Without ozan, life in a teepee during prolonged rain would have been much less pleasant. It solved the problem of small leaks and condensation that could ruin belongings and make the dwelling damp. It was this very trick that turned a simple shelter into a real home. What if I told you that everything you've been taught about Native American huts is outdated? The peoples of the eastern forests, such as the Iroquois, did not live in teepees. They built massive longhouses that were designed to last for decades and withstand harsh winters and constant rain. Their secret was not leather, but tree bark. They developed a technique for making shingles from bark that were as effective as modern roofing materials. Elm or ash bark was considered the best material. It was harvested in the spring when sap flow was most active. This allowed the bark to be removed from the tree in large intact pieces. The process was laborious. Men made 2 horizontal and 1 vertical incisions on the tree trunk. Then, using special wooden spatulas, they carefully peeled the bark from the trunk. It was delicate work that required strength and precision so as not to damage the valuable material. The resulting strips of bark had to be processed immediately before they dried out and curled up. They were smoothed out and shaped as needed. Sometimes they were lightly pressed with a weight to keep them flat. After drying, the bark became as hard as a board, but remained relatively light. The most interesting part began on the roof. The Iroquois built an arched or gabled frame from sturdy poles. They laid the prepared layers of bark on this frame, using the same principle as when laying tiles. Each upper layer overlapped the lower one, so that water simply rolled down without a chance of getting inside. These slate sheets were fastened not with nails, but with flexible rods and ropes made of plant fibers. Often, an additional frame of light poles was laid on top of the bark, which pressed the roofing tightly against the main structure. This made the roof resistant to strong winds. The inside of the longhouse was always dry. Even in the heaviest downpour, the bark roof reliably protected the dozens of families living under it. Smoke from the numerous hearths escaped through special openings in the roof, which could also be partially covered with pieces of bark during rain. For anyone living before the advent of matches, the most valuable thing in rainy weather was not fur or food, but dry tinder. Without it, it was impossible to start a fire by friction or with flint. Therefore, the seventh trick is not a single item, but a whole system for keeping the seed of fire completely dry. The basis of this system was a fire kit. It was not just a bag, but a carefully designed container. Most often, it was made of several layers of leather. The outer layer was treated with fat using the same technology as raincoats, making it waterproof. Inside this bag were stored the components for kindling. First, there was flint and pyrite, or later, a steel striker obtained through trade. These items were not affected by moisture, but they were stored together so that they were always at hand. They were often wrapped in a separate piece of leather so that they would not rub against the bag. Second, and most importantly, tinder was stored there. The driest and most flammable materials were used as tinder. This could be dry tinder fungus, the inner part of juniper bark, ground into fluff, or charred cotton fabric. This material was invaluable and was prepared in advance in dry weather. Tinder was stored in the most protected place. It could be placed in a small bag made from an animal's bladder, which was completely waterproof. This small bag was then placed in a common leather pouch. This provided double or even triple protection from moisture. Some tribes used hollow wooden or bone containers to store tinder. They were carved with great precision and fitted with a tight-fitting lid. Sometimes the joint of the lid was additionally coated with fat or wax for complete sealing. It was a real portable safe. A warrior or hunter never parted with this kit. It hung from a belt or around the neck, often under clothing, to further protect it from rain and keep it warm with body heat. Losing or getting this kit wet meant being left without fire, which in wet weather could be tantamount to death. Starting a fire is half the battle. You also need to keep it going in the rain. Therefore, choosing the right place for a fire was no less important than having dry tinder. It was an art based on observation and knowledge of the landscape. An experienced person would never try to build a fire in an open, windy place during a downpour. The first thing they did was look for natural shelter. In forested areas, dense coniferous trees such as spruce or fir provided the best protection. Their dense, low-hanging branches created a kind of canopy under which the ground often remained almost dry. The rain simply could not penetrate the multi-layered coniferous cover. Under such a tree, it was also possible to find dry material for kindling. The lower dead branches of the spruce, protected from the rain by the upper paws, remained dry and brittle. This was the ideal material for quick ignition, which was always at hand. A fire lit under a spruce tree was well protected. In mountainous or rocky terrain, other shelters were sought. Small caves, grottos, or deep rock overhangs were ideal places. They provided 100% protection from rain and wind. The main thing was to make sure that the place was not occupied and was not a den. If there was only open plain around, the task became more complicated. In this case, they looked for any depression in the terrain, a ravine, a gully, or the bed of a dry stream. A fire lit at the bottom of a ravine was protected from the wind, which could blow it out. However, there was another danger here. During a heavy downpour, the ravine could quickly fill with water. Sometimes it was necessary to create shelter artificially. If there were no trees or rocks, a temporary windbreak or canopy could be constructed. It was made from several poles stuck into the ground and a skin cape. This simple screen protected the fire from the windward side. Having dry tinder and finding a good spot was not enough. It was necessary to build the fire correctly so that it could ignite from a weak spark in damp conditions. The structure of the fire was crucial. It was not enough to simply pile the wood in a heap and hope for the best. The first task was to insulate the fire from the wet ground. Even if the location was chosen correctly, the soil was still cold and damp. To prevent the tinder from getting wet at the last second, a platform was built for it. This was one of the main tricks. The platform was made of several thick, but not rotten, sticks or logs. They were laid on the ground in a tight row, creating a floor for the future fire. Sometimes flat stones were used instead of sticks. This platform raised the fire above the ground, giving it access to air from below and protecting it from moisture. The driest material was placed on this platform. First came tinder obtained from the fire kit. Then it was surrounded by the thinnest kindling. The ideal kindling was feathers, thin shavings that were scraped off a dry stick with a knife. The inside of any branch, even if wet on the outside, often remained dry. This kindling was laid in a hut or well around the tinder. It was important not to smother the fire, leaving enough space for air to flow. When the tinder ignited from a spark, its flame immediately engulfed these dry shavings. Next, thicker branches were used. They were laid on top of the burning kindling, gradually increasing in size. It was important not to rush. If a thick, wet log was placed too early, it would simply extinguish the weak flame. The fire had to be nurtured patiently, like a child. The firewood itself was also prepared in a special way. It was difficult to find dry firewood in the rain. Therefore, they took standing dead trees, dead wood. Such wood was drier than that lying on the ground. Thick branches were split in half. Only the outer part was wet, while the core remained dry. The last but not least important problem in rainy weather is your feet. Wet shoes were not just uncomfortable. They caused rapid cooling and rubbed the skin, making every step painful. Traditional moccasins, sewn from soft leather, were not designed for walking through puddles. Moccasins made of soft leather, such as deerskin, were ideal for dry weather. They were light, quiet, and allowed you to feel the ground. But at the first rain, they instantly got soaked through. It was almost impossible to solve this problem completely, but there were tricks to mitigate it. The first method was the same: fat impregnation. Moccasins designed for bad weather or spring, when the snow melted, were generously lubricated with fat. The fat made the leather stiffer, but also much more resistant to water. It was a compromise shoe, not as comfortable, but more practical. This impregnation was not permanent. It had to be renewed regularly by rubbing warm fat into the leather, especially into the seams. This turned the moccasin into a kind of leather boot that could withstand morning dew or light rain. But it was powerless against prolonged rain or walking through a swamp. The second and perhaps more important trick was the system of inner socks. Indigenous peoples rarely wore moccasins on bare feet. They used special insoles or wraps, and these insoles were replaceable. We have considered only a small part of the wisdom accumulated by the indigenous peoples of North America over thousands of years of living in harmony and opposition with nature. Their tricks are not just primitive methods, but a survival system honed to perfection. From fat-soaked leather to multi-layered bark roofs, from tinder safes to ingenious inner linings and tipis, every element had its place. This legacy is a reminder that nature has the answers to all questions. You just need to be able to see them. What other aspects of the life and survival of indigenous peoples would you like to see in our future videos? Perhaps you are interested in hunting methods, food preservation techniques, or their navigation skills? Suggest your topics in the comments. Your opinion is very important to us. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new dives into the amazing world of ancient cultures.